Uh, I'm kind of digging my feet into the water of iOS again and trying to understand it to kind of just get a better understanding. I've done iOS a long time ago. I haven't done it in a few years since I've been primarily focusing on Android, but I have an example app that I'm playing around with on iOS, and I prefer to have auto formatting when I'm doing iOS code. So um, I'm going to discuss my research and my findings, and I'm interested to see what you guys think, and if you guys have suggestions on or disagreements on what I'm seeing here. But I will go into this. So I will kind of describe what is Swift formatting, or formatting in general. What is formatting versus a linter? So a lint rule is something that will give a warning or error in your IDE. So it's more of detecting problems. Formatting is actually auto-corrected. So your changes will your code will actually change when the formatter is ran. So why should you auto format code? So I like to think about ideas like at an enterprise level, of like a code review level, a consistency level. And I also don't like to go on my code and like auto init stuff or deal with that. So in general, I just like my code to follow what is standard practices. So what I prefer to do is auto format code. So I'll go through some of these things in here. So it prevents code style discussions and code reviews. So in general, what I like to do at a company is set a rule that you auto format, and then in your code reviews, you really can't nitpick on code style because it's a waste of time, and your code style should be checked into repo and automatically applied. And if you want to make changes to that code style, so somebody says, hey, I actually don't like it when it looks like this, you agree on whatever, and then they update the code style rules, and then the auto format will automatically apply those rules rather than discussions of, or you just say, hey, these are the code style rules that are set up by Swift. We really shouldn't be changing them. We should be consistent with what Swift recommends. It also ensures uniformity. So if you don't have any sort of auto formatter, every single file could look differently. You can have different formats of your code, which is problematic because then somebody will go through your code and then start changing it to their style, which is a problem as well. So then you have more modifications to your code base. And it's good to just have a uniform way that you're doing it. So another thing is it'll prevent you from having to spend time on manually formatting code. I haven't done this in years, so but I imagine some people are manually indenting stuff. It sounds painful to me. And the code style is committed in the repo or by default standards, and you're not modifying any of those standards. But if you wanted to go against one of those default standards built into the auto formatter, you can commit those into your repo, and they're enforced throughout the code base from that point on. And feel free to interrupt me if you have questions or if you disagree with anything I'm saying. I'm interested to do best practices on iOS, or kind of to improve myself as well. So one of the first questions when I was researching this is there any built-in formatter into Xcode? There's actually really not. So what some people recommend is just doing a Command A, which is select all, Control I, which actually auto-indents your code, so which is nice. Indenting is part of code formatting, but some problems there is the server side is not, the continuous integration side is not validating that you're forcing you to do that. And second of all, it's only indexed. There's a lot of more things that you want to set as a standard guide for formatting your code. So there's lots of ways to actually format your code locally. So there's generally two paths that people go, is a local path and then a server or a continuous integration side version of this formatting that validates that you run this formatter. So I'm just going to talk about the stuff that you do locally. And on iOS, from my experience, from what I've seen here, there's really not a perfect option. They're all kind of not so great, but I'm going to go through all the options, the pros and cons, more of just the cons I'm going to focus on, because none of them really are perfect, which is kind of frustrating. So there is Git hooks, which is not related to iOS. It's just you can define, hey, before some code gets committed, it will automatically be formatted, and it's basically that code is only checked in locally, so it's not saved into your Git repo. There is a way to save Git hooks into your repo, but there's no way to, when you clone a repo, force it to automatically apply those Git hooks. So you have to run a command after you do your first clone, which is not perfect. So here's a guide at the bottom here that kind of describes how you would set that up if you were going to use this version of Swift format. In my opinion, it's not the best way to do it. And also the downfall is that this only happens pre-commit. So what that means is as you're typing, it can't automatically format. Like, let's say, what I do is I write code and I don't indent at all. And then I just run the formatter, and then it automatically formats it, and then it kind of looks nice. Or I indent minimally, not in the standard way. So like this, another problem here is that it doesn't automatically format as I'm typing, which would be preferable. So there's another way. It's called an Xcode source editor extension. So what this does is it actually, you install an application on your Mac, and you essentially tell everybody on your team, hey, install this extension. And then what you do is I think you run the configuration file through your extension, at least with this Swift formatting. And anytime your your style guide changes, you actually have to re-import it. So it's kind of painful. Also, from what I've read from the Swift format guide, is that it's a global rule. So it's not on a per application level. So it's kind of painful as well. But the great thing about it, so what this does is actually, I'll show you an example here. In Android Studio, it will actually, I think it's in source control, it's editor. So at the bottom, it'll actually add an ability to format the file. So you can, like, let's say you're doing some stuff that's not recommended in Swift. So like, let's say you add a semicolon here. So if you format the file, it'll automatically remove it. So that's what I'm actually using right now, is this Xcode source editor extension. And then I think there's more options, but this is the last one I'm going to go over, is an Xcode build phase. So what it will do is, inside of your Xcode project, you set up a run script. So every time you run, it will automatically format your code. But there's some problems here, is that it'll clear your undo history. Let's see what else it does. Yeah, and it'll also override it whenever you build, and it also will potentially slow down your builds. So there's some problems here. I was kind of concerned with undoing your with the notes that says it undoes your history, so then you can't like do Control-Z to revert something that you did. So it's kind of concerned me there. So I decided opt on, and it only formats when you're running. So feel free to correct me if anybody's wrong, because this is what I've read. And so based on all my research here, I said that they all have pros and cons. I personally chose the Xcode source editor extension because it will format as you expect. The only problem is you have to do the proper setup, and it's global, but hopefully for the most part, you're working on consistent rules between all your projects. Because otherwise what you'll have to do is when you switch between a project, you're gonna have to re-import your configuration files. It's gonna be kind of painful, but this is the direction that I went. This talk isn't specifically about linting, but I also think linting is interesting as well. It seems like the industry standard on iOS is SwiftLint. I recommend it. It seems to be actively supported, and it seems to be whenever anybody says, "Hey, I want to lint my code," they always recommend SwiftLint. Also keep in mind, any of these formatting libraries that I'm going to talk about a little bit later will also run lint rules for you as well. But they're probably not going to, what they're going to do is give you lints of the auto formats rather than SwiftLint is probably going to do a much more intensive search to make sure you're doing things correctly rather than these formatting rules. Libraries, what they're going to do with their lints is going to check whether you ran the formatting or not. So if there's anything that can't be auto-corrected, most likely these formatting libraries are not going to tell you. And there's more things that, there's things that you can't auto-correct that you still want to be, to know about. But the lint side of the formatting rules, so like if you're running a formatter, you also should run it on the server side to validate that the formatting was applied. Because if you have a person that didn't configure their stuff correctly or is on an old version or did not update their Swift formatting configuration file, what this does is make sure that they do that before they can actually have a good pull request. So it's really useful to force this on the CI. And this is the way you ensure everybody is on the latest configuration file and also on the latest formatter version and also on and also applying the formatting rules. So when I was looking into formatters, there is 3 different formatters that are primarily spoken about when you say, hey, what's the best Swift formatter in iOS? First one is Swift format. It is this is the most popular one. That it seems super well supported. Everybody seems to really like it, and it probably, I didn't really look into the exact specs of like how these configure. There's a guide. There's a blog article at the end where they compare the different ways that all of these format. I was kind of just looking at which one is the most stable so I don't have to think about it anymore. So the next option is Swift format. It's actually developed by Apple. I'll discuss that a little bit more in a minute. And the third one is SwiftLint. SwiftLint also does auto formatting, but whenever anybody talks about it, they say, hey, it's really not perfect. And what it does is it auto corrects some of the stuff that it finds in the lint rules, and it's not a focus of the library. So it seems like it's a nice to have if you're using SwiftLint, but most people use one of these 2 top libraries if they're going to use anything at all. And SwiftLint is compatible with Swift format or Swift dash format. So they're all compatible with each other. So a lot of people recommend just using SwiftLint and Swift format on top of it, or one of the 2 Swift formats, the Apple or the Nick one. So I'm gonna discuss a little bit of the reason why I don't think I chose to use Swift format. Generally, I advocate for using like the Google or Apple way. If they build a way, you should use that way, right? for the most part, unless it's complete garbage. I'm not saying this is garbage, but there was a proposal to make this Swift formatting library be more formal and make sure that they have full support of it and give us specific specs that we should follow, which are these two links here. But the problem is that the proposal was denied, saying, "Hey, we should split this up because it's a little too much of a scope in this." And then I didn't see anybody submit a new proposal to say, "Hey, we should to do the splits." So it seems like the library is still updated and it is receiving updates, but I felt like Apple could drop it or completely change everything. So there's really no benefit of choosing this over the Nix Swift format version. So when I was looking into this, I thought at some point in time, even when Apple supports it, they're probably going to update this a lot. And then the tools, all those tools that I said how to do it locally are all provided third party, or not all provided by third party, but the extension was provided third party. And I was like, who knows if they'll support that forever. I don't want to have to switch between different Xcode extension libraries as one dies off. And I was like, this one's fully supported by Nick's team. So I chose the direction to go with the Swift format, which seems to be the most popular one. But I do hope that eventually this is built into Xcode, and then, this is not something that a dev has to think about. So Swift format, like I said before, seems to follow the standards the most, has the most stars. It even has more stars than the Apple one. Seems to be, for the most part, people's recommendation. Some people blindly say, hey, let's go the Apple route because it's the Apple way, which is fair, but I prefer, like at an enterprise level, to not have change and have good support. So that's kind of the way I was thinking about it. Their documentation is way better. They have better tooling. And who knows if Apple will ever support this. So my recommendation is the Nix version of Swift format. So in summary, I recommend using Swift format with the Xcode source editor extension. So this has to be manually set up on each computer, so it's probably part of your README on your repo. And then SwiftLint set up through pods or Swift package manager as a run phase. It's okay to have that as a run phase because that doesn't modify your code. And then SwiftLint and Swift format on the CI to ensure that no changes or lint errors. I think SwiftLint would crash your build anyways, so you don't really need to run a command for that. It'll automatically fail your builds. But Swift format, you'll have to add something to your CI to say, hey, fail the builds if Swift format fail, or Swift format gets a diff failure. It's in the guide of how to add that to your CI, but I think that's a good way to ensure that everybody is using the latest Swift format and just making sure that there's no churn of code by everybody being on different versions. Yeah, and that's basically what I have with the presentation. This top link is the library I recommend, which I referenced a lot through this. Essentially, they gave me all the information for this slideshow. So I don't think it's biased. It seems pretty like they don't talk about Apple's and Swift format that I saw. It's mostly how to set up their library. And then this NS Hipster blog article kind of compares the differences between them, what the formatted code looks like, differences between them. So if that's meaningful for you and that's something that will make you choose one library or another, this is a good article to read up on. Yeah, that's all I got. Any questions for me?
Yeah, well, I had a minor correction. If you go back one slide to the SwiftLint you called out that SwiftLint would crash your builds or basically fail your builds. We actually use SwiftLint on Swift Current pretty extensively,
Okay.
and it's actually a setting you can set to elevate warnings up to errors. And so you can lint your whole project and it will have varying degrees of conformance, I guess. We have a fair amount that are warnings, but you can continue to build and run your code and stuff. And then we have some that are set as errors, and then you can't build your code until you fix that problem. Those are quite a bit more severe. And then you can, in your pipeline, say anything that's a warning should be treated as an error. And then
Okay.
that's where you get that your pipeline failed because SwiftLint failed to lint correctly.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's good to know. Yeah, that makes sense. So like if you set the warnings as failures, errors, it'll crash your
Mhm.
build. And that would
Yeah.
crash your build locally as well with CocoaBugs as well.
Yeah. And so we have ours hooked up to a fair amount of our project files, so that as you're running, right, you're getting reminders. Our team or our community decided not to automatically change the code out from under you, which is why we're not using a formatter like Swift format. But you're right, and we agreed exactly with you with the like, but we want everyone to have the rules. Like, let's not debate where the spacing should go. Let's have the linter do that, and then we can focus on other things instead.
So are you using Swift? You're not using SwiftLint's auto format, but you're basically just following SwiftLint's rules, which kind of forces you to kind of do certain formatting.
Correct. So it's not automatically formatting your code for you, but you will have these warnings. And as part of the PR process, our pipeline requires SwiftLint to pass, and we elevate warnings to errors. The benefit to that, or at least the benefit that we talked through for that, was discussion, right? We didn't want the tool that be the final say. And if it's formatting it out from underneath you, it's hard to do the thing you're trying to do if your code keeps changing underneath you. But instead to be able to come back and be like, okay, this is a warning, but really the rule is just broken. It doesn't understand what I'm trying to do, which we have encountered on occasion of like, it just doesn't understand the syntax. Like, this is completely legitimate. It works. It's new in Swift, whatever, right? And the SwiftLint rule just doesn't know how to lint that.
Would you recommend a formatter, since you're probably way more experienced with iOS than me? What would you recommend using a formatter, or would you, if you, I mean, I know library is different than normal code, but
Mhm.
what do you, in a normal code, would you recommend a formatter?
I have not used a formatter yet. Usually it's big discussion on the team. We try to get all the alignment, and we're moving forward with that. I'm not completely opposed to the idea of a formatter. I would want a light touch though. I when I was perking up that the ability to enforce self and not use self at appropriate times in Swift format sounded pretty nice, because that's one that usually we flag in SwiftLint, but we don't change. It doesn't like change it necessarily for you until you run the SwiftLint command. And yeah, that I like that, but there are times when I would question if it does it right. So it long way of saying it really depends on your team, right? If you
Yeah.
trust your team and everyone's like aiming for the same thing, then
Would,
just being reminded is enough.
so do you elevate all warnings as errors, or and then write exceptions to the rules? I don't know how iOS you write exceptions to the rule. Like in Android, you do an annotation. Is it something similar to that, or do you cherry pick which ones you're gonna do in exceptions. One needs to say.
So as part of the code review, you review the exceptions, but it is just like, it's very simple. You just make a comment. So for SwiftLint, you make a comment and you simply say SwiftLint : disable : this, and then the name of the rule. And you can set that to varying levels. You can disable it for the entire file. You can disable it for literally the line the comment is on, or you can disable it for the next occurrence. Like this next line is going to throw this warning. Disable that warning for that occurrence. That way, if it happens again, you're notified. One we tend to run into on occasion, I think we eventually, I don't know if we've since disabled it, but is line length. Because at first you're like, oh, line length makes sense. Line shouldn't be that long. But Swift Current just gets into situations where it's like, there is no way to break this line up when you're specializing this generic in such a way that you have a very descriptive names or you have very poor variable names, and now you can't read your code. So
Yeah, interesting. So like if you had a really long string of a name, it wouldn't wrap that to the next line because it can't, it's just saying, hey, you got to make stuff shorter.
Yeah. Basically, like you need to break this up and make multiple lines out of it. And instead of using the Xcode line wrap, because
Cool.
I have one question as well. I saw when you did your formatting, you went through that menu to that bottom option.
Mhm.
Is there a way that you can make that auto run on save, or is there like an easier way to run that?
I know on my last job, we kind of set up some rules. I don't know if I did it for everybody, but like formatting on save. But what I did is I just set up a hotkey with it. The thing is, it's annoying is that I don't know. Maybe Richard knows how to do this, but like on Android, what I did is I set up this thing called a macro, which you do multiple things and then you save that. I don't think this exists on iOS. And then so what I chose to do is the last thing is to do save all. And then what I did is I overrode the key binding for save all in Android Studio to be format and save all. But the thing is like I couldn't find the way to do that in iOS, so I just essentially I put Control S, which only literally just does formatting. But I would prefer to do a format and save, but I just didn't figure it out yet.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to. I know code snippets, but I haven't looked into multiple step things.
Yeah, I just decided I'm gonna do Control S. I could have just deleted one of the other ones and maybe just did something else, but I did Control S is apparently an unassigned key, so I was like, okay, I'll just do that one.
It looked like it auto formatted on you, or maybe you had hit Control S.
No. I swear it did that. I don't know what happened. Like
you put in that semicolon and then it affixed your line indentation for you.
Maybe Xcode automatically does that. It just did it again. Any of you guys have Xcode open?
I do. Well,
like mine did it again. Whenever I added a semicolon, it fixes the indenting. Like I did it on another file when I was preparing, and I didn't think it did it, but maybe it did.
Maybe it's just semicolon.
Yeah, maybe it's just semicolon automatically indents.
Yeah. See, they're working on it. They got one thing in.
Another interesting thing I saw was there's people use AppCode, right? AppCode has automatic formatting as well. But the problem with AppCode is I was like, oh yeah, maybe because like I saw some people use SwiftGen. So like there's this library called SwiftGen, Jordan, which is pretty cool, where you automatically generate all the files that suck for Git. You know what I'm saying? Like your project file, like certain files that automatically generates that off of like a YAML file or whatever. So I was like, oh, maybe I could completely go over this. But then if I went over to that, I could auto format, but I don't think you can do auto format on the server because the command relies on app code, like, you know, a shell thing inside of app code. So your CI would have to have app code on it too then, right? To automatically run this formatting rule. So then you'd have to pay for app code twice